this is a transatlantic, multinational event that we're having here, Richard.
This is amazing, huh? This is just so heartening and exciting to see the world come together at times like this.
Yes,
amazing.
It is. It's so good. Okay, so friends, we're going to go ahead and get underway. Continue to let us know where you're from. We are glad you're here. Welcome. My name is Tamara with Love in a Big World. I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And my guest today for this webinar is Richard Gerver, and he is in the UK. Richard, will you go ahead and tell us more about who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure, Tamara. First of all, I just want to say hello to you and hello to everybody who's made the effort to tune in and join us this morning, this lunchtime, this evening, wherever you are in the world. So to cut a very, very long and convoluted story as short as I possibly can, for the best part of 20 years, I was an elementary school teacher and then school principal. And then for all kinds of very happy and positive reasons, took an opportunity that came my way 13 years ago. And I took the biggest challenge and risk of my career, which was to leave my frontline education career and go off and work as a speaker, as an author, as a consultant around the world in a whole range of different fields: education, professional sport, the corporate world, across a whole range of sectors. And that 13 years has led to an unbelievable adventure where I've had the opportunity to work with extraordinary people in amazing organizations, and reflect constantly on what all of those experiences mean in terms of a challenge for our children, their future and education.
Wow. Well, I for one, am so thankful for you and your work. We worked on a book together, Building People, a few years back, and that's how we got acquainted. And I'm excited about our conversation today. We're going to be talking about change and how we can navigate the current changes that we find ourselves in as a result of this pandemic. So, Richard, one of the first questions I want to start with is, why are children more adaptable to change than we as adults are?
You know, it's a question that I think I've been trying to find the concrete answer for since I started my teaching career. You know, and even as a teacher in an elementary school, you see change happening at such an extraordinary rate all around you, from the very youngest children, who, by the way, I think are the most inspirational group of human beings. And if I can just say so at this point, I think when you're lucky enough to see really great early years education occurring, you realize just how skilled and extraordinary the very best early years educators are. And for those of us maybe tuning in, listening to this today, I would ask you all, no matter what level you teach at, work at with young people, that you go find the best run early years unit you can find wherever you are in the world and go spend some time there. Because when you're in those environments, you see kids changing as part of their minute by minute process. And I think the question for me was, as I moved out of that world of children into an increasing world professionally populated by adults, I kept coming back to that same question. You know, the observations I was making were that kids of 4, 5, 6 years of age, incredibly adaptable, incredibly resilient. Yet the older we become, the more terrified of that change process we are. And I think a lot of it is to do with perspective. You know, when we're young children, first of all, everything is new. Every minute of every day is different. And actually we crave the new. We're hungry, we're curious. We want to know about our world. We want to make sense of it. We want to build new relationships. We want to have new experiences. But as we grow into adults, the whole perception of change changes. It stops being about adventure and it starts being a chore. So the first really interesting thing for adults is we don't see change as often as an opportunity for new and development. We see it as something imposed on us, something that's done to us. So it feels reactive. And often as adults, change doesn't feel like change. It feels like we're constantly being asked to do more of what we've always done. So when we hear change in our heads, we hear disruption, we hear burden. and we hear we're going to have to work harder. So it becomes something we resist. And I think for me, one of the joys that I've always tried to celebrate and understand is if you think of change in the same terms as learning, in some ways it's the same thing, right? The ability to learn is in essence the ability to change. And I think that one of the great explorations is, what do we do to ensure that we keep that in ourselves increasingly? Because, you know, the human learning graph is quite a sad tale, really. Because 0 to 5, we're learning on a kind of curve, on a line that looks like that. You know, 5 to 11, 11 to 16, 16 to 18, 18 to death. And so much of that is linked to that joy and excitement, the curiosity around change and learning. And how can we nudge the graph that way slightly? How can we maintain that magic of discovery, of exploring the unknown, of looking for the opportunity in every experience we have?
So what I hear you saying is we need to be more like children.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a number of years ago, I've got myself into some incredible fixes over the years, Tamara, as you can imagine.
I bet you
People
have.
can, you know, when suddenly this elementary school teacher walks into a major finance organization in the US to talk to them about leadership and management, you never escape that feeling of imposter syndrome, right? And I remember walking into one organization and talking to the CEO, who was saying to me, you know, Richard, we hire some of the most brilliant minds on earth, graduates, straight out of some of the top schools. You know, they're extraordinary people, unbelievably well qualified. But we're a tech company, and the particular company I was doing to work in audiovisual technology. And the CEO said to me, you know, it's a huge frustration for us because these guys are great at doing what we ask them to do. But if we ask them to take a leap of faith and be innovative and creative, they find it really hard to do that. And I very glibly said to him over this briefing call, maybe you should stop hiring anyone over 5 years of age. And, you know, so yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we need to do is stop believing that our jobs always is to educate our children, and actually sometimes ask, what is it we can learn from them?
Yes, I love that. And, you know, to speak to what you just said about your corporate experience, I've been in meetings, even in professional development center situations with teachers, where I will use smelly markers. This sounds really funny, but it's a trick that another friend taught me. And you know what happened when you use those markers that smell good, like they smell like lemon or orange or whatever, inevitably the adults do this. They uncap them and they go, and then they smile really big. And as soon as they smile, it's like their defenses melt, and then they're more open to a conversation about change.
Yeah.
But what is it, Richard, that makes us so afraid of, as adults, of change? And what can we do to help us? Like, what are some tips or tricks that we can use to help us join in on that spirit of adventure?
Well, I think that first thing is hugely important. And I think it's linked to the way we couch mistake making and failure to our children as they get older, right? Because when kids are really young, mistake making isn't seen as bad. What it is an opportunity to learn. You know, I always tell this, you go back to any of us that have been fortunate enough to hang around with really young kids. We sit there on the floor cross-legged and we build wooden block towers with them, right? And the thing is that we keep building and building, and eventually the young child puts a block on the top, it falls over, we laugh, and we go, come on, let's build again and let's see if we can build it better, right? So as young children, those risk moments, those opportunities to step into the unknown aren't seen as fraught with danger. They're seen as rich in opportunity. And one of the things that happens as we get older, and both in the education system and also in the wider spectrum of our lives, is we're taught that actually if we make mistakes, it's a bad thing. It's a sign of a lack of intelligence, a lack of knowledge, a lack of experience, that somehow it makes us less good than our peers or the people that we're working with or learning with. And so we become adverse to risk. We become adverse to risk because we see mistake making as bad. And that happens increasingly as we get older. And so as we perceive that we gain more and more control over our lives, we avoid experiences where we're gonna make mistakes. And you know, one of the things that I think it's really important for us all to remember, and I look back on this from the learning as a young teacher, is that you learn nothing new by getting something right. You only ever learn something new from the point of a mistake or the realization that you don't know something or you can't do something. And I think that, you know, like anything in life, if we want to be better at it, we have to develop habits, we have to be disciplined, and we have to push ourselves constantly to have these experiences. And they don't have to be gargantuan risks, you know, because we know as we get older, those risks do have greater consequences. It's a harsh reality of growing up. But actually, for example, reading a book off a shelf by an author you've never thought you were going to like, going to see a movie in a genre that you just don't think's your kind of thing, ordering off a menu a piece of food that you wouldn't usually go for, right? Those things become habitual. And it's like anything in life. The more you do it and the more you realize you come out of it okay and actually enjoyed those experiences, the more confident you become in taking those opportunities step by step by step again in the future. And, you know, as educators, I think we also have that dual role, not only for ourselves, but to really make sure that we're celebrating those moments of mistake making and risk taking amongst our students as they get older. Because if we can help them do that, they won't necessarily suffer with quite the same level of anxiety that we have.
So what I hear you saying, and friends, you might be hearing my neighbor's dog outside. This is the joy of working from home. All this authenticity and vulnerability. So yes, that's Moose. What I'm hearing you say in all of this, Richard, is that part of this, in the change that we find ourselves in, is that we need to embrace a playful look, if you will, and let go of the high stakes nature of this. I mean, I, for one, and I know like you, because we had a conversation a few weeks ago, we're entrepreneurs at heart, right? And so as an entrepreneur, we thrive on change and adventure and innovation. And so how can we help those around us who might be more staid in their ways, embrace the change that we find ourselves in, and lead the children that we serve, as well as the families and the systems?
I think, you know, I think a lot of it comes down to trust, mutuality of trust, trust in others, trust in the people around us, particularly our students, because I'm not sure sometimes we don't overmanage students because we're so desperate for them to achieve and get through what they need to, that we just hold their hands a bit too tight. And we might come back to this in a second as a reflection of homeschooling and what we're living through right now. But the other thing is to trust ourselves more, because in many ways, we weren't raised to live in worlds of uncertainty and exponential change. We were raised to believe that our job was to seek out certainty and that we'd be rewarded for it as we went through life. You know, in a way, so much of the mass education system was designed to filter us through the right avenues to ensure that we ended up with a level of certainty in our lives, economic, social, whatever that might be. And that we were then taught by our parents, our grandparents, the people around us, that once you've found your lane, stick to it, get your head down and drive as hard as you can within it, right? Because that's the way to certainty, and that's the way to a modicum of stability and therefore success. So one of the things that I think is really important, I see a lot in people, is people have a spirit of adventure, of childhood in them, of wanting to be curious. The number of people you come across who say to you, oh, I always wanted to, but, you know, but, oh, I can't, but, or because, or but. And we procrastinate because what happens is our logical common sense part kind of blinkers us in here. And I think that's because to an extent we've stopped trusting ourselves, we've stopped trusting our instincts, and we've stopped trusting our ability to overcome stuff. And I think, you know, what we're living through now is such an amplification of that. And I don't want to in any way diminish the horror and uncertainty of what we're living through, right? It's really important for me. But what I do want to say is what we are all achieving right now is remarkable in terms of our resilience, our flexibility, our ability to be adaptive and to master change, you know, for every single one of us, and particularly for those of us in and around education, either as educators or as parents and carers or as children. You know, what we've seen happen in the last 3 weeks is seismic. Yet we're all still here and we've all found a way. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. And, you know, it's very easy for a man who's sat here with 2 children who are both grown up to say, you know, because I'm not having to homeschool 5 and 7-year-olds right now. But our children have shown remarkable resilience and adaptability. Our parents are showing remarkable resilience and adaptability. And our education professionals are being heroic. And what I'd really hope is that people dwell on what they're achieving currently and use it to galvanize them when and if we return to a kind of state of normal. Because what I hope this does is makes us all appreciate how extraordinarily capable we are of stepping outside of our lane and making it work. You know, you talked a couple of minutes ago about being entrepreneurs. And I think it's really important for people to understand, because to me, entrepreneurship isn't about money, making money, building businesses. It's about that ability to seize an opportunity, to step into something new, and to have the confidence that you know you'll find a way to make it work. And I think that's the key thing. It's about having a heightened awareness of knowing you can make stuff work.
I agree. And I appreciate, friends, just to highlight, I appreciate all of your comments. I'm seeing them as they come through. And at this moment, if you have a question for Richard or for me, you can go ahead and add that. We'll try to answer as many as we can in a few minutes. But Richard, there's so many things about what you're saying that I'm sitting here thinking, again, about the changes that this means for our children, our families, and our systems, our educational systems. And like you, I am so grieved, like deeply grieved for the pain that we are experiencing as humanity. Then there's this other part of me that is thrilled about the grand adventure that we're on, because it has been time for things to change. The systems have not been working, and unfortunately, they've long been failing our children and our families. And so in the midst of all that we find ourselves in, I'm hoping that we will pause and see what is it about the seismic changes, as you mentioned, that are working, that we can hold on to moving forward. So what are your thoughts about that?
I think there are so many in here, but I think I want to come back to this thing around trust. You know, that one of the things that is so incredibly important is that we move away from a model that I think was built up in the industrial age, not necessarily specifically for education, but it's been used to shape so much of education. And it comes from the old Taylorist model of everything being about efficiency. And if you focus on efficiency, you increase productivity. And if you increase productivity, you increase profit. And if you increase profit, you put that money back into becoming more efficient. So you create this cycle of industrial stability and growth. And to an extent, our education system and the way we're raised has been designed to mirror that. And therefore, one of the things I often say is, as I describe that model, as being built on an assumption of incompetence, because then when you manage people within that model, our assumption is that they will only achieve their best if they're managed to do so, right? So whether it's in an organization and it's the way employees are managed, whether it's in a school and the way that policymakers manage educators and people working in the education system, or whether it's right down to the way we manage our students, we assume that we'll only achieve our best if we're hyper managed through the process, right? Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I've seen over the last decade or so, when I've had the incredible good fortune to visit some really dynamic organizations around the world doing really innovative and creative things, is they operate under a very different culture. And it's a culture of assumed excellence, where actually what they say is our job isn't to manage people through a process, it's to create the conditions and trust them to flourish beyond the process. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways, what we're witnessing over the last 3 or 4 weeks, the innovation, ingenuity, and creativity that people have been demonstrating is showing that we are far more capable than we've been led to believe we are. And actually, for me, what I want to see, and particularly specifically if we're talking about education, is we have to reset the education system to be founded on an assumption of excellence, not an assumption of incompetence. We need to create a far greater focus on leading conditions for development and growth, rather than focusing in on managing conditions to ensure a level of development and growth. You know, I look at some of the creativity going on out there online and through the conversations people are having. And not, you know, not the experts, not the superstar sports people giving sports lessons or the superstar musicians, the creativity of normal human beings and what they're adapting and creating is truly extraordinary. And so one of the other things we need to learn is that we're all capable of this stuff. It's not just the privileged few, it's everybody. And I think if we can all take a little bit back with us to say, whatever our setting, we are going to work on the assumption of excellence, then we're in a place where I think we can make a system that is truly worthy of our kids.
And I love what you're saying. And then we're going to get to some questions. I think you and I both, from an educational leadership perspective, have seen some of these changes coming, especially as education has been embracing the maker mentality and ed tech. But I agree with you. We've operated for so long in an atmosphere of fear and control. And so to flip the script and say, kids, you are capable, and we're here to support you, and we're here to coach you. We're here to provide the resources that you need to become your best self. That's a very different narrative. And I think that is exactly what we're seeing happen now. And I'm thrilled about that, because honestly, my kids, for one, they've learned almost more from YouTube than they've learned in the classroom in a lot of ways. Just because in the world that they're living in, they have to be adaptable, and they're looking at the skills and what they need at the moment, rather than just sitting in their words, wasting time, because they don't see the connect between the textbook learning and the real world. So let's get to a few questions. Richard, if you are head now, how would you reconnect your school community?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm not sure if that came from Sharon Gray. Sharon, who's online. Yeah, and I'm telling you why, because we had this very conversation earlier today here in the UK. I want people to know that I know Sharon very well. She's a former school principal herself and senior education advisor who is truly wonderful. So people should connect with her afterwards. We were talking about this earlier today, and one of the great fears is what we can't do is just swing open the doors in June or July or September or August or whenever the doors are go, right, everybody in you come. We are going to have to understand and appreciate that there is going to be an awful lot of work to do for the entire school community about preparing people to be reinstitutionalized on a human level, right? So we're going to have to remember that not only are people going to have suffered trauma from the medical issues and the horrors around COVID and losing relatives and friends and family and all that kind of stuff, but we're also going to have to help people come to terms with the fact that family members might have lost jobs, that their economic situations may have changed. These are all the negative things, but also we're going to have to bear in mind that a lot of our kids and their communities have lived in a world that I've been describing over the last couple of weeks as free-ranging their brains. They've been doing all of this creative stuff, right? And so what we can't do is just fling open the doors and go, here we go, back to normal, everyone back into the classrooms, let's just get on with it. We have to create a phased and very skilled reopening of an education system. And we have to give more control and trust over to the people that work in those communities. You know, we can't just say one size fits all anymore, whether it's curriculum, whether it's testing. There is such a powerful place for skilled educators and counselors right now. And that has to come first, because what really matters is the skill they have on a human level, on an emotional level, to understand their students and to understand each other. And so one of the things Sharon and I were talking about this morning was we almost need a period of time before we start the learning again, where we just get our communities to re-engage with one another and build on a human level. So maybe we spend an entire term or semester just rebuilding the human bonds and relationships, and then we move back into some form of academic development after that. I think we have to be very, very careful and measured about how we do that.
You're right. I think there's a toll. There's a huge cost that we've all paid in keeping one another safe, and that cost is economic, but it's also with our mental health and our relationships. And so that reinstitution, not of a system per se, but of relationships, like how do we reconnect, is, I do agree, is going to be vitally important. So
and also for the adults, you know, we have to remember that it's not just our kids that will have suffered trauma and a whole change of the way they've lived their lives. People are the adults too. We need to help them make sense of and reconnect with that more formal environment if we want them to be truly capable of helping our students.
Mm-hmm. And so we're getting some questions in, and I know we just have a couple more minutes. People are asking, so what is the framework for a new system? How does this look? What are the ideas that we can help re-engage and the children? So go ahead, Richard, if you could recreate education.
Okay,
what would it look like?
A couple of things, because we could do this for a whole session and more, right?
Right? We should do this again.
Yeah, I agree. I'm up for it. The first thing to say is what we can't do is go back and try and push everything back into a normal. So the first thing we have to do is suspend any form of formal testing and assessment, right? Because at the moment, every time we talk about innovation and creativity in education, I describe it like this. It's a bit like turning around to the world's most innovative chef, you know, Ferran Adria or one of the great chefs, and saying, chef, create something entirely new, but it has to look and taste like this chocolate cake. Right. Because what the chef then does is use the same ingredients they've always used in the best way they always have to make sure that that cake looks. So we can't expect innovation if we're just going to measure and assess the way we always have. So the first thing we need to do is, if I was redesigning the system, it's not that I don't believe we should be held to account, because we absolutely should, but we need to create that system first and then find ways to hold that new system to account. I think in terms of the model itself, we have to be far, far clearer about what we want our students to look like as human beings when they leave our schools or colleges. So if I was going back into a school environment in the next few months, living through what we've lived through, that would be the first thing I'd be saying is, okay, so if our students leave us at 11 or 16 or 18 or whatever age they leave us, the first question I'd be saying to my community is, what do we want them to look like as human beings? What characteristics, what attitudes, what skills? And then I'd be looking to build a curriculum that supported that human development as well as the knowledge base and development. And you know, yeah, it's so complicated, but it begins with questions. You don't build a model from scratch and just go, let's build it. You have to generate the correct questions. And so what I'd be asking people to be doing now is connecting in their communities, educators, parents, students, and say, okay, what kind of questions do we need to ask? So that then what we can do is design a system that's worthy of the perspective we bring to the conversation.
Yes, this is so good. And we have more people sharing their ideas too about reflection and collaboration and people having a voice in this, accountability, and yet providing the support that's needed. And yes, I think this is time for all of us to collaborate on what do we envision and how can we not just dream about it, but how can we make that a reality? Because as you've said, Richard, this is an opportunity, a prime opportunity for us to change.
And how do we make sure that we are creating a system that is sustainably able to constantly evolve, so that in future, in 10, 15, 20, 30 years time, we're not having to suspend the system again and start from scratch. You know, what we need to do is be more Kaizen about what we're doing. We have to create structures and systems where we're constantly questioning and challenging what we're doing, where we're bringing in a collaborative sense, much wider groups from the emerging global community to help us frame constantly new questions against which we can assess and transform our practice so that it feels incremental and consistent and evolutionary, so that we don't have conferences in 5, 10 years time where we're going, how do we create a new curriculum? How do we develop a new approach, right? And that's what we're capable of. And if we can do that in a sustained period of time, right the way through the future, we can ensure that we're constantly developing a legacy that is fit for purpose.
That's so good. And I love what you're saying about being Kaizen, because there's a level of transparency there.
Exactly.
That it's not just, the knowledge isn't just in a select few about how do you do this thing called school or education, but it's how do we all know so that if we do, or when we do, I might even say, find ourselves in a similar situation as a global community, that we can carry on. So thank you so much, Richard. I want to be respectful of your time, even though we have so many more questions and ideas that we could share, but perhaps we'll be able to do this again soon.
I hope so.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, challenging us with your ideas. And friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Any last thoughts, Richard, before we go?
Nothing really, except to say, first of all, thank you to all of those people that have taken the time to come on board and listen in on our conversation. I'd love it if those people want to connect with me further and we can continue these conversations in any way, shape or time, because one of the things right now is we've got time. And I think that's going to be my final thought for today, that again, taking out the context of all the horror of what we're living through, I think right now, we have a gift in all of this, and it's time, right? Because seconds have become minutes, minutes have become hours, hours have become days. And it is highly likely that we will never have the gift of this level of time again. And I just urge all of us not to feel guilty about trying to fill every minute of every day, not feeling we have to fill it constantly with stuff, but actually to use some of this blessing to reflect, to think, to connect, to have big abstract conversations, because I think the investment in that now is going to pay dividends moving forwards.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate you, and thank you all for tuning in to our conversation today. We will follow up. Richard, if you would share any resources that you want me to distribute to our friends, I will gladly do that. So watch for your
Perfect.
email, and we'll follow up with you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.